Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 487. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whelan, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the whatnot Segulin, and the Duke of You-Know, and of course the elder statesman of the podcast. I'm going to be jumping really quick into this episode, mainly because of the fact this is part 2 of a 2-part discussion with Wyatt, Weed, and Gayle Gallagher. This episode does play as its own contained piece. We had 2 discussions. One was talking about in the previous episode, episode 486, about Batman The Dark Knight Returns, the epic fan film. On this episode, we're going to be focusing the second part of our discussion on their film Shadowland. So if you haven't picked up Shadowland, it's a great chance to go ahead and do that. If you look into the show notes, there's direct links to either stream it from Amazon or to buy it from Amazon.com if you don't already have it. It's a really cool vampire movie. This was something where they originally gave us the opportunity to just do a promo about it. Jim and I like to watch things before we promo it for anybody. And in watching it, we really felt like this would lead to a very interesting discussion. We hadn't seen the movie before. We found a lot to really enjoy about it, and it just led to a great opportunity to discuss this. And, of course, one of their upcoming movies. So if you want to watch Shadowland before joining this discussion, we do get a little spoilery in it. So I do highly recommend that you check out Shadowland first before listening to this episode if you want to see the movie before getting anything spoiled. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network, the League of Comic Book Podcasts, and the InfiniteComics.com podcast partnership. Sponsoring this episode, once again, as always, is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. I want to do a general shout-out to DCBService.com because it's the end of the month. We're getting to that point where they are going to be switching over to the brand new deals of the month. DCBService.com always has amazing deals, up to 75% off. They do the amazing bundles that Jim always shouts out on the show, so be sure to check out DCBService.com. They are a digital partner, so whether you use Comixology or MyDigitalComics.com, you're going to want to link those accounts to your DCB Service account and make sure to get 5% of those purchases towards your DCB Service order. Just by doing that, it doesn't cost you anything more, but it does help our show sponsors, so please consider checking them out and doing that. Over at InStockTrades.com. InStockTrades.com is your collected edition source. I always shout out the deals of the week. Be sure to check them out and see what those amazing deals are. They're 50% off. But they always have specials listed of brand new releases and books that are the top sellers. It's a great way to browse through and maybe see some things that you might have missed. They're your collected edition source. So thank you, DCB Service and InStockTrades.com, for continuing to support our show. So without further ado, because this is the second part of a 2-parter, I'm going to jump us right into our discussion. Once again, part 2 of our discussion with Wyatt, Weed, and Gayle Gallagher, this time focusing on Shadowland.
Carter Hall, scientific genius from a far-off world, flies into action as Hawkman.
One of the great things in the conversation with Gayle that I had as we were preparing for this, I discovered Shadowland. I had never seen it before. I told my co-host, I said, well, we're going to be doing the Batman fan film. We both love it so much. I said, why don't we watch this and like have a conversation around this film? Yeah. So I'm going to put a slight disclaimer on here because I think Jim and I can't help but get a little spoilery about it. So we'll do some promotion at the beginning of the podcast as far as Shadowland, making sure our listeners who are listening right now get the film, stream the film, or have their own copy. I've got a DVD sitting right here of it. I loved this movie, and it was my first experience from it, right from that 1897 kickoff. I love the fact that we've got a film. It takes place it's everything that I love about film. It takes place in multiple time periods. It's got vampires. It's got this sense of mystery to it.
Sure.
It does everything that sci-fi, I think, does really well. It's got characters where you're trying to figure out along the way, is this person a hero, a villain, or something else entirely?
Right.
And I really loved that it wasn't just white hats, black hats. It was an interesting gambit of characters where I was trying to learn their backstories, what their motivations were, and that was something that was really great about this film. And I'm not summing it up very well because I think there's so much depth to talk about, and I think we're going to get to that through our discussions here. But I do want to preface it by saying, first exposure to this film, I was missing out. I really enjoyed it. You know, one of the things I'm going to say to our listeners over this, just to add a genuine nature to my comments, when Gayle sent the email about this, we talked about doing a quick promo for this to point people towards it. When I watched it, I sent Gayle an email back. I said, no, I want to talk about this because it's good. And Jim was saying the same thing right before we were recording. I'm like, I'm really excited to talk about Shadowland. So thank you.
Both of us are sitting here grinning because Shadowland, it's a couple of years old now. So it's so awesome to hear that people do get excited about it.
I have no delusions that Shadowland is, like with The Dark Knight Returns, I have no delusions that Shadowland is the greatest film ever made. Could I do it better now? Probably. Would I do things differently? Sure. I'm very happy with the film. If I have a frustration over Shadowland, it's that here's another situation of, compared to The Dark Knight Returns, it's a massive film. We had like a $250,000 budget. But it's still unbelievably low budget by Hollywood standards. And there were no name actors in it. We tried to get some name actors involved. We didn't secure any name actors. So there's nobody of any notoriety in it. So despite the best projections of our DVD release, the film did okay. I wouldn't call it a loss for us, but it wasn't a big moneymaker for us either. The film has a great reputation. We've been in film festivals all over the world.
Got, a dozen awards sitting on our shelf?
Yeah, we've got a lot of awards sitting on our shelves from various filmmakers or from various film festivals and conventions. It helped our reputation immeasurably. Like, there are places where I can say Shadowland and it's currency and it helps me out and it speaks for me. I can say Shadowland and it's like, that's my business card right there. The frustration, though, is that still Hollywood and the internet and the DVD market is so particular and so fussy and so well controlled. We were never able to really break through with that film. And we got so close. And when I say close, I mean we were close on like Walmart, and ultimately Walmart didn't end up carrying it. And I think we might have made it into Walmart's online catalog. Yeah. But we got so close on being carried in the stores and then missed it. We got dangerously close to being in Redbox. And right about the time we were going into Redbox, so was Let the Right One In. And I think that Redbox opted for Let the Right One In and passed on ours. And just politically, we missed it by an inch time after time after time. We had some theatrical play. We made some money in the theatrical market. We sold a decent amount of DVDs, but something else that happened is we're gearing up Shadowland. We're finishing the film. We're getting ready to take it out and shop it around like late 2008, early 2009. It's promising. People are telling us it's going to do good things. Salespeople are estimating that we're going to sell 50,000 DVDs to the U.S. market alone, and then the stock market goes in the dumper. A lot of people lose a lot of money. A lot of video stores go under. And this damn thing called Netflix surfaces and takes over the universe. And then Netflix becomes another exclusive movie club where maybe you can break into it, maybe you can't. So I'm very proud of Shadowland. I love Shadowland. I look back at it with fond memories. And again, a lot of hard work. I feel like it could have hit bigger. It could have had more of an audience. The people who have found it have really liked it. But, made at a time when you had Twilight and all these other things out there, it should have caught on bigger than it did. And I can't tell you why it didn't. I don't know. Maybe we needed nudity. Maybe we needed more blood. Maybe we needed curse words. Maybe we needed, some big name horror actor to do a cameo in the middle of it. I don't know.
Our best rejection was from the Sci-Fi Channel. I actually had a couple of conversations with them, and they had a copy of it, and the official notice that we got was that we didn't have a CGI monster and there wasn't a high enough body count. And Wyatt had always said, I think we're too good for the Sci-Fi Channel. I think we're too good for it. So when we got that rejection notice, I'm like, yeah, we were too good for the Sci-Fi Channel.
We were officially too good for the Sci-Fi Channel, yeah. They liked it, and we stayed in touch with the guys from the Sci-Fi Channel for years and kept talking to them about projects. It just nothing ever came of it. But so Shadowland opened a lot of doors. It didn't walk through a lot of doors and sell a lot of copies, but it opened a lot of doors. And it was a great project. It was a great learning experience. You can probably see different. You can see similarities, I'll bet, between Shadowland and Dark Knight Returns, and also you can probably see changes in my style from Shadowland to Dark Knight Returns.
Real quick, so too, for the people that haven't seen it yet, despite our warning that there are going to be spoilers in this conversation.
The synopsis for Shadowland is essentially that in modern day, there's an old church that's being renovated, and they're digging up the grounds, and they're renovating this old church, and they accidentally, unknowingly uncover and revive a vampire who's been buried on the grounds of the church. And once she gets revived and she snaps out of it and she comes back to life and she rises up out of the grounds one night and starts walking around the modern city, she begins to have flashbacks of her life long ago in 1897.
She has no idea that she is a vampire. She doesn't know where she is or when she is.
She has complete amnesia. She doesn't know what's happened to her. She doesn't know how she got there. She doesn't know that she's a vampire. And wackiness ensues. I mean, basically, it's her quest to get back to where she's from, figure out what has happened to her, and meanwhile, she becomes aware that there are people trailing her. There are modern-day vampire hunters moving in on her. There are forces conspiring against her as she's trying to figure out what she is and where she came from and how this all happened. So it's kind of a Bourne Identity with a vampire. And so all these things are moving together and building to, this big climax at the end where, everything comes together. And that's the story in a nutshell.
One of the things I liked about it was, because I'm a huge vampire fan. I've read in a lot of the short stories, seen the movies that come out. I always like the vampires that aren't just the monsters. They're not just the blah, 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 blah. They're actually a creature, a living, breathing, actual creature who happens to be a vampire. And it's dealing with that. I thought that for me was something that I really enjoyed about this, because the whole time I'm watching, I'm trying to figure out, okay, who is she? What's she about? Is she going to be good? Is that person about to drop? Is that guy a dead man? There was a couple people throughout this. I was like, come on, please let him die. Please let him die. I was rooting for her to rip open some throats. Just the homeless guy, the perverted homeless guy. That's all I'm going to say on that one. I really wanted just to see her just unleash on him, just because he did a great creepy job when, just the way he was portrayed and just the levels of creepness.
Didn't he play that great?
He played that wonderfully. And I was like, the whole time I'm rooting for her to rip open the throat. Like, come on, take him down.
Here's a really geeky piece of trivia for you. You'll love this. The fans will love this. The homeless guy. And when you see the movie, the homeless guy thing will become clear what we're talking about. The homeless guy is a friend of mine named Jay Kelly. And Jay Kelly has been a filmmaker and sometimes actor for as long as I've known him, and we kind of spent the same time out in Los Angeles together and worked out in Los Angeles in the same circles. For a brief period of time, when Jay and I first met back in 1981, I was going to local science fiction conventions dressed as Han Solo, and he was going to local conventions dressed as Luke Skywalker.
And looked just like him.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can really see it anymore from him being the homeless guy in Shadowland, but when he was younger and a little bit skinnier, he was a dead ringer for Mark Hamill. And during his time in Los Angeles, he was actually Mark Hamill's stand-in for a few years. So he was a stand-in for Mark on a film called The Guyver. He was a stand-in for Mark on a film on the Flash TV series when Mark was playing the Trickster. So Jay actually has a tie to Mark Hamill. So when you see the homeless guy in Shadowland, imagine, Mark Hamill playing the same part. So I've known him for a long time. It's interesting, two things. You talked about layers of gray, and it wasn't the white hats and the black hats. Me personally, I am a big fan of that. I think far too often Hollywood has to give you a good guy and a bad guy. And I don't know that every film needs a hardcore good guy and a hardcore bad guy. And so often I get a reaction, I'll get somebody reading a script, or I'll get a Hollywood person going, where's your bad guy? It's like, what are you saying? Are you saying you've read the script or you've watched the movie and you feel it needs a bad guy? Or is it just your knee-jerk reaction to every situation is to paint by the numbers? that it has to have this, and it has to have that, and it has to have this other thing. Granted, it's a good idea to know the rules. It's a good idea to know what makes a story, what makes conflict, what makes a good script. It's a good thing to know what those elements are, but I don't think that every script and every movie has to operate by the same cookie-cutter precision and the same fill-in-the-blanks numbers. So there were people I know who read the script of Shadowland and said, your one problem with this film is that you don't have a clear-cut bad guy. And I'm like, well, I don't have a clear-cut anything in this film. And the fact that you spotted that and you liked it, I really appreciate, because I like films. You know, most people are in shades of gray. Most things that happen in life are in shades of gray. And I like my films. You know, occasionally you get into a good film where you've got good and bad and dark and light. And, you know, I love a Star Wars film with good on one side and dark on the other, and, you know, a struggle between good and evil. That's great. Lord of the Rings, give me good and evil, and let the battle take place. But even in a film like Lord of the Rings, there's many different layers along the way, and many different characters conspiring to do different things for different reasons. And I like that layering more than just the clear-cut good and bad. And there's another thing in Shadowland. I tried to do a balance between the traditional vampire lore and new rules of vampire lore, and new things thrown in. And there's some things that were very, very traditional, and that I actually had very scientific, very logical explanations for. And if I had gotten to do more stories based on this world, I would have given you more detail about some of it. But I tried, like you said, to paint the vampire in a more realistic light. I tried to paint the vampire as something that actually existed versus magical creatures. Because as much as I love some of those old vampire films, some of them are pretty ridiculous. Granted, I have characters doing things in this film that are pretty mystical, but you know, some of those old vampire films with Christopher Lee changing into a bat, or somebody puts a couple of candlesticks together and makes them into a cross, and that's what defeats the vampire. I mean, they're a lot of fun, but you can't take them real seriously sometimes. So
I'm looking at the film right now, and one of the things that I'm really marveling at, poor Laura. If it tells she came to work and she was like, the mud again? I was captivated by the fact that you saw the mud change from being, you know, the wet mud to like it's dry. She is in such a situation of trying to figure out who she is that we see that that's more of a focus, because she can't communicate with anybody because of what happened with her throat.
Yes.
So I really loved the way that we got to learn that this is a girl who's intelligent. She's able to communicate with people on the fly after coming out of the mystery that she's got going before her, because she's trying to, like, I think, kind of relive what happened to her. And,
yes.
The sequence with Cook, like where she's having these great interactions with Cook. I thought at the beginning when I first saw it, I'm like, wow, Laura's going to be the bad guy of the film. This is going to be a revenge story or something like that. And that's just going to be the whole premise of the whole thing. I loved the shades of gray in that in the situations with Cook, they're actually very sweet. And, you know, you see this innocence to her where, you know, she's trying to survive right now and make it go. And we see her just with this kind man in this sequence where she's got the same survival instincts that any other human would. And I found myself connecting with her right in that sequence of events where I'm like, this is a character that I'm interested in. I'm interested in what's going on with her and where her journey is going to take her. What is she going to discover about that? And is she going to twist at some point in time? And I'm going to find that now I'm like, no, Laura, don't do this.
With Laura, I kind of always felt like, to say women's liber isn't really the right term, but she's very much a woman out of time in her own time. So being born in 1897, clearly she was a little more adventurous and a little more defiant than most women in that age were. So that she's reborn into modern day is good for her personally, but the circumstances that she's reborn under are very bad. But yeah, she's not an innately evil person. She just finds out that she's got some really strong primal instincts that she's going to have to learn how to control. What is interesting is that I've talked about writing book sequels to this film. I've talked about turning Shadowland into a novelization of the story, basically the script. And then I've talked about going on from there in book form.
And then people want to turn it into a comic book, too.
People have talked about turning it into a comic book. I think it'd make a fun comic book series. Because what I would do in ongoing stories is she would become more vicious. She'd become a much more hardcore survivor, but she'd never lose that sense of right and wrong, and she'd never lose that sense of humanity. So if you want to put her in terms of, say, a Batman or a vigilante, she would learn how to survive in society by surviving on the bad people. So if you were to open up on another film or another book, you'd probably see Laura preying on like gang members, drug dealers, human traffickers. You'd see her preying on the bad people in society in order to survive, but still having respect for good humans. And in future stories, I imagined her going back to the cook, asking him for help, forming sort of a partnership, friendship with him, and the two of them, to a certain degree, going on the run together. I also pictured after the events of Shadowland, I imagined the vampire hunting efforts being taken over by the U.S. government, and now it's a more militarized version of the vampire hunting efforts, and then her going against the vampire hunting efforts of the U.S. government and how that all gets handled.
But not that he's given this any thought.
Not that I've given this any thought. Also, too, I think we'd need Lazarus's backstory. We'd need Lazarus the vampire. We'd need his backstory. We'd need to see where he came from, who changed him into a vampire, and then how would that play into modern day? Would the original master vampire who turned Lazarus come looking for him, come looking for what happened to him? Would Laura eventually have to go up against the master vampire who changed Lazarus down in South America? So, you know, there's like a 3-part epic that could happen there. I think if this film had been done on a studio level, it would have been nice to have studio money, because there are things I could have done, like in my original version in my head, Laura comes out of the ground initially, and she's been hibernating underground for 110 years, and she's emaciated. She's basically skeletal. So she comes up out of the ground almost like a walking skeleton, and she's terrifying looking. And the first time she feeds, you'd see her revitalize a little, and her body would fill out, and her flesh would become more colorful. And in my $50 million version, the cook is standing there watching her, and she's continuing to eat. And as she eats, her skin begins to become more flesh-colored. Her body fills in, her face becomes more full, and he's rubbing his eyes in amazement because he can't believe what he's seeing. And it's scaring him because he's seeing this woman transform and become more fleshy and full right in front of him. So over the course of a bigger budget film, she would go from not just being wet and muddy to pretty. She would go from being bony and skeletal and mummy-like to being very pretty and filled out and sort of back to her normal self. So there are things like that. You mentioned ripping out a throat or two. I could imagine that in a big budget film, a studio film, if we'd gone R-rated and we'd gone with some names, yeah, you're right.
The homeless guy would have gotten it.
The homeless guy probably would have gotten it in much more spectacular fashion. The SWAT team, she would have taken out the SWAT team in a much more spectacular fashion. So there are things that I think we could have benefited from doing the movie at the studio level. And hell, if a studio ever discovered this film and came to me and said, love the concept, love the idea, here, we just want to buy the concept and go do our own version, with my blessing. Take it and go, do a big version budget of it. It'd be fun to write the books, publish the books, and if the books caught on, then people could come back around and rediscover the film, or maybe the film would feed the books, and then the books would generate a whole brand new film. That would be crazy if that ever happened. It's just a matter of having the time to sit down as a full-time filmmaker and write all this stuff out. I'd love to do it. You know, maybe someday I can sit down and work with an author who'd be willing to do it. So
we need to get you an artistic benefactor.
Yeah, an artistic benefactor. That I like that term. That's a good way to put it.
You mentioned the SWAT team, with her taking down the SWAT team. I really dig that scene, but I also especially like the ending of it with the guy I called the scared SWAT guy. You know, the one who was on the outside when she's like sitting there, covers his mouth and just holds her finger up. No, he's like, oh, okay, no problem. You know, I love that scene because I was laughing my head off going, yeah, dude, good call there.
Yeah. Well, and it's a cool scene because it shows how much she's learned. It shows how modern she's gotten. It shows how sort of hip to the modern society that she's become. And at that point, she's sort of stepped into her own. She knows who she is. She knows what she's capable of. And with confidence at that point, she can walk up to this guy and go, you better be quiet if you know what's good for you. Prior to that, she really was still testing her own strength and figuring out what her abilities were. At that point, she's kind of gotten her head around what she's capable of. And without being spoilery, the very, very ending of the film, I think you know what I'm talking about, where she walks out onto the street and the sun is setting and there's still a little bit of sunlight left and she's getting ready to sort of walk off towards the end of the movie. There's a sort of a resignation there that I think is very sad, but also very poignant, where she kind of has come to terms with, okay, this is what I am. This is, some of this is going to suck and some of this is going to have some great limitations, but okay, I can deal with this. This is what I am. It's sad and I'm a little surprised by it, but okay, here's where we are. Now where do we go next? And then, of course, we leave it open in such a way that there could be more. So
the resolve on her face, and it was a silent scene, but just the look, she told the whole full just range of emotions in just that final. Because I agree, I loved how that ending with her throwing up the hood and just how just that whole just the majesty of that moment. I thought that was a really cool ending for it. I like that, man.
This woman, Caitlin McIntosh, the actress.
Caitlin Corey now.
She's now Caitlin Corey. Here's a funny thing. She's married and she now has 3 children. She looks almost no different. If anything, I would say she's more muscular and more fit now than she was in that film. She's in just amazing shape. She's shifted her focus. She's more about fitness competition and fitness training now than she really is about acting. And I think that's sad, because when we met Caitlin, when we auditioned her, she'd done some little things acting-wise, but her big claim to fame was she had played Elmo in like a touring stage production. I think it was Elmo on Ice or something.
I don't think she was on skates. I think
it was like a stage
Sesame Street Live or something.
Sesame Street Live, and I think she played Elmo in Sesame Street Live, and she toured the country. There's this beautiful statuesque woman who looks like Wonder Woman. So she basically toured the country in an Elmo costume. And it was, I think, the Elmo costume and the training of, I'm going to be in this big furry suit and still sell you on emotions and sell you on a performance that really, I think, helped her get to where she was. And we had a series of auditions with her basically to figure out, okay, we know you're pretty, we know you're fit, we know you look the part. Can you do it without dialogue? Can you show everything that you're going to need to do? And she did a really amazing job. Her audition was, I had her do the scene where she crawled out of the grave for the first time. And she was really just trying to get her footing and get her strength and stand up out of the grave. And she did such an amazing job. We also rehearsed the scene with her and the homeless guy, because we knew that was going to be really important. And she aced those auditions, and she did such a great job. And young, strong, such a trooper. And she had been a former Miss Teen Missouri. She'd been a beauty pageant contestant. So when
she went on to like some of the Miss Teen USA competitions too, I think.
Yeah, she's done a lot of stuff. When I talked to her about, look, this is going to be a rough part. You're going to have bloodshot contact lenses. You're going to have vampire teeth in your mouth. You're going to be covered in mud. There's going to be bruises. There's going to be cuts. There's going to be blood. There's going to be a lot of crazy stuff. And she was thrilled because she'd spent so much of her young life being pretty, posing for cameras, being hounded by makeup people and touched up constantly.
Wearing ball gowns. And
the fact that she was basically going to get splattered with mud for half the production, she was thrilled. She was like, awesome, let's do it. Bring it on. Yeah. So I wish she had gone on to do more stuff. And I think that she had the opportunity, and there were a couple of films that came her way, and they didn't really pan out for her. So I think if she had wanted it more, she could have had it. But I think as fun as it was, I think she just decided not to go that direction. I'm hoping she'll work with us again on some stuff in the future. I'd love to have her come back and do some things.
We abused her I mean, we'd shut it down at times because it was too much, but just the fact that Caitlin was in such good shape. She runs a lot in this movie, and she's wearing a black pleather jacket in 99, 101 degree weather here in the middle of summer in St. Louis, and boots that were her own boots but not made for running, and she never complained. And there was days that were like, okay, we've beaten her up too much today. She's going to keep going, and she will hurt herself if we don't stop today.
There were days, we weren't going to make the schedule, and I just thought we could keep shooting, but I don't want to. She's going to pass out if we don't stop shooting. So there were days we stopped and pushed and said, Caitlin, we're stopping. We'll come back and finish this tomorrow. No, I can do it. I can keep going. I'm like, no. Go home, get some sleep. We'll do this. We'll finish this tomorrow. It's okay. Don't worry about it. She was a trooper. She was an amazing talent on that film. That film would not be what it is without her.
Yeah.
I really appreciated the use of flashbacks and how, some of them were quick flashes, giving us like just a snippet of the story. Then others were more in depth, giving us a sense of her backstory and what was going on. I like this really, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the discovery of how this story unfolds. Because they were all new characters to me. The premise was new to me. All I knew from the email was Shadowland, and it was, because of the fact that I really liked the fan film, I'm like, let me go see this and see what it's like. As that was what was captivating me in the story. I just every time I got to see a different character from, I think it's Julian, is the he's like getting together the tools that he has, and we're seeing him start putting everything together, getting to know a little bit more about his backstory and what his background was and why he's doing what he's doing. These were all things that were just drawing me into this interesting cast of characters that I found myself every time we got to a new scene focused on somebody, trying to wrap my head around them and where they were going to go, and more importantly, how they interacted with Laura, because Laura's our focal point of this whole thing. It was really great to have that kind of experiences, but the flashbacks in particular were something that I greatly appreciate that in film, because I love when you do vampire stories. There's got to be this sense of them being timeless, or of not timeless, more very old, very ancient. They lived another life. And that really set that stage for me with that and how they were used. But they weren't overdone. And that's sometimes it's a trick that gets used too much. And this I thought was really well done.
I've always liked the fact that we, the viewer, get to know Laura's story as Laura is remembering Laura's story. That it's not like we had some sort of an insight into what was going on with her. That we discover her past as she is.
Now, I don't know if it would shock you to find this out, but I'm not giving anything away to your listeners by saying, the opening scene of the film, 1897, boom, here she is. She's a vampire. She's obviously been captured by a posse. You come in right at the moment where they have captured her, and they are in the process of saying a prayer over her and pounding a stake into her chest. That's how the film opens. First 45 seconds of the film, boom, this woman's a vampire. Then you get to sort the rest of it out. Then the pieces start to fall into place, and then you start to see the mystery unfold, and the rest of it happens. As this film was written, and as this film was originally shot, you were not supposed to know that she was a vampire until she figured out she was a vampire. The film originally opened at a huge church over in Europe. You met the bishop. You met a young priest who was working with the bishop, and the bishop started telling him about these efforts that they had around the world to take care of these certain supernatural problems. You then went to the dig site. You saw Laura come out of the ground. You didn't know who she was. And everything unfolded in a kind of a different way, and you had more expository scenes, and you had longer scenes. That cut of the film was about 2 hours long, and we previewed that film to some friends and filmmakers and some audiences. And basically what happened was two things. Number one, it came back as it's too long. I mean, it was exactly the film I wrote, and it was exactly the film I set out to make. It was just long. And also, most people had it figured out that she was a vampire like halfway through the film. Some people figured it out right away. Some people figured it out later. But most people knew she was a vampire, that by the time you got to the big reveal at the end of the film, and some people were maybe, well, is she a werewolf? Is she a vampire? Is she a demon? sometimes it varied, but everybody already knew she was something. What was she? So we realized we weren't fooling anybody, and we were also losing our main sale tool, because if we tried to take this film out into the market and keep it a mystery, I mean, if we had, Brad Pitt and, I don't know, name your favorite actor.
Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, if it was Brad Pitt and Quentin Tarantino and, I don't know, Gwyneth Paltrow, you could have sold the film as being a mystery and come and see the mystery of the film. I mean, we didn't have the Sixth Sense on our hands. We did not have Bruce Willis starring in a film with a huge MacGuffin twist at the end. That's what we were going for. We weren't going to be able to sell it like that, not on the level that we were at. And we realized we were losing our main marketing tool, which was the whole vampire thing. So because the audience reaction was what it was, I went back and I re-edited the film. I lopped out about 20 minutes of it. You can still see pieces of the opening discussion, all that flashback stuff of Julian, and he's hearing the bishop talk to him about stuff. That's from an earlier scene that began the movie. And then we rearranged it such that the vampire stuff came right in the beginning. Like, boom, she's a vampire. Now it's about watching her. It became more like watching her snap. It wasn't about what is she. It was more like, oh, no, you know what she is. When's she gonna snap? When's she gonna go bug nuts? When's she gonna just turn around and kill somebody? So it became a different kind of film, and I think probably a more successful film. And that was another case. You talk about the dedication of filmmakers. We put in all this time, all this money, all this energy, and when I wasn't getting the responses from audiences that I wanted, I thought, well, my vision aside, this has to succeed. This has to make sense. This has to work. If this doesn't work, this is a failure. So by re-editing and restructuring the film, it worked. It worked better. It came in shorter. It was more intriguing. It made it a more interesting film and a more fast-moving film. So that was a case of evolution and a case of, re-editing the film. And I just had to not be so stuck on my vision.
Well, and I was really proud of you for letting that go, that after we screened it for these other filmmakers who we knew and trusted and knew that their feedback wasn't mean-spirited in any way, it was because they wanted us to succeed as well, that once Wyatt was done curling up in a ball on the floor because his baby had just been shredded, but to let go of those scenes that were so gorgeous and that you'd worked so hard on, and just to know that it would make a better film if you changed this stuff, I thought that was awesome, that you were able to put your ego aside and go, okay, if I want this thing to be good, let's rearrange it.
See, I knew my ego would be okay because I knew somewhere down the road I'd cast myself as Bruce Wayne Batman in my own film. So I knew I could take the hit.
So I don't know if you guys figured it out or not, or looked at the credits, that Lazarus is the Joker?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that with it. Well, I realized that just by going back and forth and seeing the casting, just like Jason was, the cab driver, but he was also the voice of Superman on the telephone.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. So seeing different stuff, I was like seeing different people. I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm glad to see that. And you guys have another movie that Alfred, the actor who played Alfred, stars in. Actually, I think Jason also is a Four-Color Eulogy or something.
Four-Color Eulogy, yeah. That's going to be coming out this, I don't know, late spring, early summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one we're very excited about. That one's entirely different, too. That's a family drama. Although it's about comic book geeks, we've not had great success at like comic book conventions because it's not a Batman film. It's about a guy and his girlfriend who have to come back to the Midwest when his mom is diagnosed with cancer. So it's kind of a family drama. But because they are comic book geeks and they're wannabe comic book creators, there's the whole pop culture aspect of the film too. So we call it kind of a family drama comedy.
Yeah, but it doesn't play well at conventions. I mean, early on we thought, oh, this is going to play really well at all the comic book conventions. But then as we got closer to being done with the film, it's like, well, this is a little more dramatic, and this plays a little bit more dramatic. It's a good comedy drama, but I don't know that it's necessarily something that the fans will embrace. I mean, fans of movies will embrace it, but I don't know that it's necessarily, if you've got a chance to see a sneak preview of Batman versus Superman at Comic-Con or go see Four Color Eulogy, you're going to go see Batman versus Superman. You're not going to go watch Four Color Eulogy. People who watch it like it. We thought we were going to have a huge tie-in with the comic book crowd, and as the film got done and as it became more dramatic and less geeky, it became less Kevin Smith and more, gosh, I don't even know who to compare it to. It just became it became more Garden State than it was, Fanboys or Clerks. So the film kind of evolved as it went along. But we're very, very proud of that film. Although it was very much a group effort, Jason, Nick, Hearn, myself working on the script together, Jason and Nick's company, Archlight Studios, sort of teaming up with Pirate Pictures to produce the film. And another one of these films that when you see it, you can see it and then I can tell you what the budget is. You will be gobsmacked when I tell you what the budget was on it, and you will wonder how the heck we were able to do it. And we did it very much like we did The Dark Knight.
Two words, bologna sandwiches.
It's all the catering.
we raised a little bit of money on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and we didn't raise the amount that we wanted to because we had grandiose plans of, and again, casting a name in the film and having a name play one of the characters. That did not materialize, but we still ended up making the film. And because it was kind of a small film that we could shoot in chunks like The Dark Knight got done, we were able to do this film for a ridiculously cheap budget, but still keep the production value. But also, unlike The Dark Knight, Four Color Eulogy really is about characters, and it's characters in simple environments. It's you and your buddies sitting around a fireplace in the backyard talking about comic books. It's you and your buddies arguing about comic books at the store. It's you and your family going around about life choices and what you should and shouldn't do with your life. So it's not like we were trying to find a bat cave or stage a car chase or anything like that. It was more, there's a part of St. Louis called South City. And if you're from the St. Louis area or you know the city, South City has a feel and a look and a style to it, and this is very much it's like making a movie set in the Bronx or making a movie set in Queens or making a movie set in Beverly Hills or something. There's a certain look and a certain style to it. This film is set in South City, and we really captured the South City flair, the dialogue,
things people do.
Yeah, the feel of the place. So people from St. Louis have really dug it. We had a couple of weeks of theatrical play last year, and we've been to a few conventions, and we have a festival version that we're selling right now. But yeah, the full-on DVD release and it being available for streaming and download, like Gayle said, will happen next spring, late spring or early summer of this year.
One of the things that I do love about the characters in this film is that, unlike something like Big Bang Theory, which I love, by the way, that the characters, though, are very much caricatures of your typical geeky guys. The guys in this film are real guys, that they've got real problems, they're trying to find jobs, or they've got jobs, and it's the everyday life. They just happen to love comic books, and I like that they are real people. It's not that they're stereotypes.
Yeah, no, that's very true. As a matter of fact, Jason and Nick are really vocal haters of the Big Bang Theory. They do not like the Big Bang Theory because they don't think it represents fanboys in a good light. But that's probably a debate for a whole nother show.
I do have to say, before we started the show, we were kind of all talking about your comic book history and where you grew up reading comic books. Although I grew up with comic books, and I've got two brothers, so I actually grew up reading a lot of the Batman and Superman stuff. I'm not full-on comic book geek girl, but I've learned so much about comic books and about geekdom because of Four Color Eulogy, because in writing it and creating this and hanging out with Jason and Nick, and it's kind of osmosis that I couldn't avoid learning as much as I did about comic books.
I'm actually looking at the film right now, Shadowland. I have it running in the background without the sound running. I'm seeing the police chase of her, which is one of my favorite sequences because it's all this convergence of events that are happening down at this point. She's been going on her travel. We got Julian who's been coming after her. We've got the police that are going after her. It starts to turn into it's not this film, but there's this sequence that's Run Lola Run. It's like she's kind of going from place to place.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Yeah.
And when I say it's a sequence that's like that, because I don't want to say that this film's like that, because it isn't at all. I just see there's an intensity in this moment where things are just starting to. We've been waiting. I've been as a viewer. I was waiting for this convergence, because now she's starting to realize she has powers, and Julian's chasing her. The police are chasing her. It's where everything that like we know is a part of this is starting to manifest. So the intensity, I guess, is I think what I was going for there when I was making that film comparison versus the fact that it really is indicative of that film. This is really where things just start to go, wow, this is what I've been waiting for. And you only feel that way if the anticipation is built. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to comment on this sequence is it meant so much more to me because of the fact that we got to see the threads built along the way. It was like a spider web that just kind of everything just kind of came to the center, and you just wanted to just nail at this point. So I really loved the way that this played out for myself as a viewer, because this sequence, you talked about before how sometimes there's fan films where it's just a battle. There's not a story there. And while the battle's cool and you can really appreciate the choreography like you were talking about, you're missing that why do I care about the battle that they're fighting? This battle that they were fighting, or this event that was happening, I cared about these characters so much at this point that I wanted to see what was their interaction going to be like. And I loved that about this film, that the characters mattered to me by this point.
And that's good to hear that you felt that way and that you spotted that. Going back to The Dark Knight and going back to other fan films and other theatrical films, if I hadn't, because there are people on YouTube who are like, nothing happens in this movie. There's no action for the first half hour. What is this crap? It's like, okay, go play your video game and don't watch this then. Because if you hadn't gotten introduced to Bruce Wayne, if you hadn't seen the relationship between Bruce Wayne and Jim Gordon, if you hadn't seen Bruce Wayne's sort of lament and his missing of his old life and his sort of where he's at now and how he's stagnant, if you hadn't seen all that, if you hadn't gotten that emotional connection, if you didn't see him sleepwalking and wake up on the stairs of the Batcave and go through all of that, none of it would have mattered. Something I'm determined to do. I mean, if I do nothing else, if I make 3 more films and I accomplish nothing else, you will understand why there is animosity between Batman and Superman. And when the Batman and Superman fight finally happens, you will know and understand why they are throwing down and why it had to happen that way. Because the thing you're talking about, it doesn't exist in so many films today. And, people make fun of Batman versus Superman, but, there's a reason why they make fun of Batman versus Superman. It's a big, spectacular movie with some really cool stuff in it and some really neat scenes. But when Batman and Superman finally start duking it out, let's face it, they're duking it out because everybody wants to see them duke it out. And they're not doing it for the right reasons. They're not doing it for solid emotional reasons. And Shadowland, the emotional backstory, Dark Knight Returns, the emotional backstory. And if I can go further with this, the emotional backstory, what brings Batman and Superman to blows? Why is Joker so obsessed with calling Batman out? Why is Batman so obsessed with bringing Joker down? Without that emotional backstory, without that resonance, none of it matters. And if that makes me an old-fashioned filmmaker and that makes me somebody who's going to make slower-paced films that can't hold the attention of, a new generation of filmgoers, oh well. Then I can live with that. That's fine by me.
You mentioned that possibly doing this as a book series or being a comic book series or something like that. When you originally do a story like this, a film, like an original story of your own, do you have in mind because there's a lore to this. That's something that I really appreciated. This movie tells you its rules. You mentioned that you used certain vampire rules that were modern, certain ones that were classic, that were important to the kind of story that you were telling here. I like, as a viewer, knowing the rules because I love these kind of films. And but sometimes it's hard to know what rules are they following, especially with a character like the vampire. Does she have limitations? What kind of powers does she have? What are those things? I like discovering it along the way and getting to know the rules and why they're in place. When you're crafting this, do you craft just this story? Do you craft like the world first and get kind of a sense for what the world is? How do you get to the point where it turns into something logical? And does it naturally lend itself then to future stories? I'm just kind of curious about that creative process because I really like this world a lot. And I would be interested in, if you do books, I'm on board. I want to read more. I think it's great.
Well, what happened specifically with Shadowland is it's interesting because it's very critical. The whole backstory is very critical to this because what happened was there was a story that I had written that I had come up with, and it was sort of tied to a production company in Los Angeles. And I initially tried to talk to the production company in Los Angeles about maybe making that story as my first feature film. And I had sort of been progressing along for months thinking that that was the story I was going to tell. This other story that I'd written, this other idea that I had that had been sitting around for a couple of years, that's what I thought my feature film debut would be. Well, the company in Los Angeles wasn't being real cooperative, and they weren't being real cool about the idea of me getting the rights back. And we're not talking like a studio. We're talking a little indie company that I had kind of a handshake agreement with. And we've since resolved it all. But back then, I didn't want to be a double crosser. I didn't want to start any trouble. So when they were being kind of sticky about me taking the rights back and making this film, I said, okay, that's fine. And I backed away from it. Well, there I am sitting there with kind of a budget in place. I had a private investor willing to dump money into a feature film. And the film project that I was looking down the barrel of went away. So I had this other idea, and the idea simply was this mysterious, angelic-looking girl dressed all in white crawling up out of a hole in the ground in the middle of the night. And that was something that had come to me. I was in Los Angeles, and I walked by a construction site in Westwood, and what was cool was there were these angel statues on four corners looking down at this construction site, this big hole in the ground, and I'm walking by it at night. And that's the image that came to me in my head, was this woman crawling out of the ground and all the questions. Who is she? Why is she buried in the ground? How did she survive down there? Why is she coming out of the ground now? And that was all I ever had. So when that other script went away, I sort of turned to that woman crawling out of the ground concept, and I started writing it. And really, honestly, I kind of wrote most of the events of the story, but I hadn't answered the question. Who is she? What is she? Why? Why is she in the ground? What is she? And I went through everything. Is she a demon? Is she an angel? Is she an alien? Is she a mutant? What is she? Magic? Is she a sorceress? Is she from ancient times? What is she? The answer that filled everything in, that took care of all the questions, was vampire. And every time I filled in the blank with vampire, everything fell into place. Like her abilities, her capabilities, all the things she could do and survive, all the stunts I wanted her to pull, all the things I wanted her to be able to go through. If I filled in the blank with vampire, boom, it all fell into place. But I was resistant because at that time I thought we'd seen enough vampire films. We got enough of this vampire stuff happening. I don't know if we need any more.
You didn't want to make just another cheesy horror film either.
Well, I didn't want to make another cheesy horror film because we knew it was going to have a budget of just a few $100,000. But then we sort of turned the tables on it. And I thought, well, if I'm going to make a vampire film, I'm going to make a different vampire film. I'm going to make a very atypical one. But because you start filling in those blanks and you start asking yourself all these logical questions, the backstory starts to fill itself in. Like, when we originally thought of this, was Carlos, who plays Lazarus the vampire, was Lazarus he wasn't going to be South American originally. Originally, Lazarus the vampire was just a dark, mysterious, handsome stranger. Well, when we cast... I think
that was his name in the original script, wasn't
it? Yeah, in the original script, he was called Mysterious Stranger, or Handsome Stranger. So when we cast Carlos, and Carlos was so obviously Venezuelan, we embraced it and we said, okay, well, let's build a Venezuelan backstory for this guy. And how did he come to be here? And how did this play into everything? when we started talking about Laura having a mother and a father and what was going on there, then what was their backstory? What was going on with their family? Where did they come from? Did they immigrate here? So just through the actors doing some of their work, and because you have to answer questions. You go on set and it's like, well, what do you want the set to look like? Where are these people from? Are they wealthy? Are they middle class? Are they farmers? Are they aristocrats? And you have to answer those questions. So you have to build yourself a little bit of backstory. But I think because I wrote the story the way I did, and because I came to vampire through sort of a backwards process, there was a lot of extra story built for this. And that's why I think there's so much interesting backstory on this particular story and why it works so well. Julian, who is he? How did Julian come to this? I mean, we came up with a backstory that Julian is former military and he was a sniper and he ended up being recruited out of the military, and then he ended up coming under the guise of the church, and he wasn't really able to settle down and become a good member of the church. So the church used his skills to do something else with it. And it just, I think because what we wanted is we didn't want to get caught with our pants down. We didn't want people to come at us and say, why doesn't this work? Why doesn't that work? So whether or not the story came through in the film, if we did all the backstory and we worked out all the details, it would show sort of subconsciously in the details. So, I think probably Shadowland has more backstory and more plotting and more figuring than most of my stories do. I think my philosophy on writing these things is if there's a question, I usually try to answer the question. Like in Four Color Eulogy, there's not a lot of questions. It's, these people, they're modern day, their stories are fairly straightforward, you can identify with these people. So there's not as many questions. With Shadowland, when we raised issues and when we pointed to things, we tried to answer the questions and have the questions in our heads answered so that it would make sense to viewers. We were trying to do our homework, if you will. So
when you mentioned doing homework and characters and things like that as you're writing a story, do characters ever change? I mean, in the sense that, like, was Laura ever somebody else? Was Julian ever somebody else? Did they kind of, as they shaped themselves, become a different character? If I'm making any sense in what I'm saying there.
Yes. To be honest, I think some of that happened in The Dark Knight. I think my portrayal of Bruce Wayne changed as it went along. In Shadowland, casting and characters very much depend on casting a lot of times. And on Shadowland, I tried to relax. I tried to just kind of let it become what it was going to become, which was kind of risky. When you're spending $200,000, $250,000 on a movie, it's not that I didn't know where the story was going. It's not that I didn't know how it looked and how I was going to direct it and how I was going to shoot it. I knew all that stuff. But I was trying not to be so anal retentive about every little tick, every little smile, every little blink or wink. I'm capable of directing something and telling people exactly what to do, where to smile, how to emote, what to perform, how to play it. And I've done that before. I tried not to do it on Shadowland. I tried to let the actors do their job. I gave them guidance. So when, for example, Caitlin got cast, I originally imagined Laura as much more waif-like, much more soft, much more kind of gauzy and ethereal, and much softer and weaker in the beginning. And it would have played much more like, a girl coming into her own and growing strong and becoming more of a woman or more of a monster, depending on your view. When we decided to cast Caitlin, she was already so strong to begin with that the character became a little more defiant and a little bit more sort of playful in that way. So her character very much changed. Julian went from being your typical kind of movie badass military type to being someone a little more introspective and someone a little more haunted by things. I've heard criticism that people don't like Jason Contini's performance in the film. I think it's that Julian's not a fun character. I think Jason's performance in the film is fine. I think just he's a hard character to warm up to. And some people get him and understand him, some people don't. He just became a little bit more of a sort of a lost lost puppy in this film. So yeah, things transform, things change. As a director, your job still remains. Is it going too far off the rails, or is it still staying within the wheelhouse? And is it becoming something better? Different is okay. Sometimes different isn't what you want. You still have to keep an eye on all the elements and make sure everything still gels, make sure that everything's still copacetic. You don't want to let people run off the rails and do something so crazy that it doesn't make sense with the rest of the movie. And occasionally you throw the actors a bone and you say, okay, let's do one. Let's try it the way you want to try it. And sometimes they do something brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And sometimes they do something and you're like, okay, I'm going to bury that take and make sure nobody ever sees that one. But yeah, they do change and they do morph. In something like Batman, probably less so because the characters are so iconic and you really need to go into it with a stronger sense. But in something like Shadowland, yeah, I'd say things transformed more in Shadowland than just about any other project I've worked on. Four Color Eulogy, very organic film done with some very professional and experienced actors, but very much they did the script that we wrote. And once we decided on the actors, those were the characters. And we would let them do stuff in that film, but with Four Color Eulogy, it was almost more like, what would the character do in this situation? Not what is it going to change into, but what is the character going to become? Or what is the character going to do? In Shadowland, there was a lot of transformation and a lot of shifting. And honestly, I think it was for the better. I think the film could have been just as good in its original form, but it would have been more stock players. It would have been more stock characters that you've seen before. And that's not always successful with viewers. Sometimes you give people something they have. You and I talk about Shades of Grey, and we're fine with it. Some viewers aren't fine with Grey. Some viewers like their archetypes. They like their stereotypes. Some viewers want you to give them a good guy, a bad guy, a square-jawed hero, a black-cloaked villain. They don't want to think about it. They want you to give them big, broad things so that they can sit back and relax and chill. Shadowland is not that. And it's not for everyone because of that, I think.
Gayle touched on something earlier that I think is what I like about the film and why Julian didn't need to be the typical leading man. I actually quite liked that Julian wasn't, because it was something I talked about at the beginning of this film, too. I liked that the characters aren't your white hat, black hat, or things like that. But we already had in Laura's journey that Gayle mentioned the discovery that you go through with Laura as she's discovering her past and who she is and her powers. We're discovering those things along with Laura. So you've already got that latch-on person. Typically, the character that Julian would be in your archetypes, he'd be your leading man that you're following along with. You're already doing that with Laura. So he didn't need to be that. So it's far more interesting to say, well, can we do something different with him then than you would normally do with this type of character? And maybe not make him that lily white, blatantly everybody's got to love and want to be that person. And I think the movie's better for it and more interesting because you don't normally see that type of character be what Julian is.
Sure. And I agree with you. And I'll be honest with you. Sometimes there are things like that. There are conscious decisions that I made and said, I'm going to choose to go in this direction. And then there are things that we weren't really aware of at the time. Like, I don't know that I was as conscious of how, if we played against type, it would balance itself out in the long run. I wish I could tell you that that's exactly how we meant it to be. But I think that what happens is sometimes you make a plan and you stick to it. Sometimes, though, the plan changes or you're not aware of things. But if you're being true to certain things, I think it works out in the long run. I think if you honored characters, if you honor dramatics, if you try and do quality work, I think that it things grow and become organic and it takes on its own life. So I think there are things that happened in Shadowland, admittedly, not because we planned them that way, but because we did solid work and those things sort of grew out of it. So to tell you that I meant for every single observation you made to happen would be a lie, but that you see those things in it makes sense to me because we did work hard on it. We did take it seriously. We did put a lot of work into it. So when you come out the backside of it and say, well, it's like this and it's like this, all I can do is say, yes, you're right. Yeah. and it's not always what we intended, but it's kind of a happy result. It's a happy side effect of sort of the chemistry that was brought together in the film.
You're talking about the black and white versus gray. I also like that Julian's character is very gray. Also, that when he's talking to the bishop, he's kind of hard-ass about the stance that he's taking, but then he kind of evolves during the course of the film and meeting Laura, and I like that about his character, that it gives him that humanness as well.
It's just, I'm going to lament again that it's sad, though, that, this film, because it's low budget and it's not real well known, and because you don't know any of the actors in it, it's very easy for people to dismiss it, and I think people in some circles have dismissed it. I will put some of the emotional interplay and some of the scenes in that film up against big budget stuff I've seen in theaters this year, big budget dramas I've seen in theaters this year, and I think it holds its own, and I think it stands up against some of that stuff. But because it's not name Hollywood actors doing those scenes, it doesn't get the acknowledgement. And sometimes I think that's sad. I think it's sad sometimes that things get dismissed because they don't have names, they don't have a big marketing push, they don't have a big studio behind them. We've yet to find the really great indie film viewing situation or network. We've yet to really find a market or a place where these indie films, I mean, Sundance Channel does some of it, Sundance Film Festival does some of it, the IFC does some of it. More of these things are starting to be seen online, but we've yet to develop the pipeline where truly indie films that are still of quality have an outlet. They burst through here and there. Occasionally one makes it onto Netflix. Occasionally something breaks out and it gets released in theaters. But it's just really a shame that there's not, like there's a subdivision for underground comics, and there's now all these outlets online for original series, and series that got canceled are now popping up on Netflix, and there's all these outlets for stuff, and I still to this day don't think there's a proper outlet for indie films. I really just don't think there's a one-stop place where you can go and see your indie films. You can do that for anything else, but you can't do it for indie films, and it's a shame.
Well, but
it's
you
really
and I have talked about this before too, that the advent of technology as it is today, that basically everybody can make a movie, that's got the positive side that, hey, anybody can make a movie. But it's got the negative, too, because, well, anybody can make a movie. Yeah. So you've got this stuff out there that you've got a lot of quality indie stuff, and you've got a lot of indie stuff that needs a lot of work. So, yeah, it's hard because as indie filmmakers, we run into stuff like with Netflix, for example. There's gatekeepers. We can't just walk up to them and go, hey, here's our movie, take it, because they're not going to take every indie film that walks up to them. But at the same time, you kind of need gatekeepers at some levels because everybody can make a movie now.
But it's a system, and it's a profit-based system, and it functions on a certain level, and if it's not going to generate a certain amount of money, they don't want to put forth the effort, and to a certain degree I understand it, but it's also incredibly frustrating because Shadowland is the textbook case of a film that missed by a few percent. And it missed by a few percent consistently. If the tide had shifted just a few degrees in the other direction, this film would have been in Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, it would have been in Walmart, it would have been on cable television.
Well, if it had gotten released 4 months earlier.
It had been on the Sci-Fi Channel, it would have been in Redbox. I mean, this film narrowly missed becoming a hit. We were that close with this film, and
that being said, we're really counting on this podcast to revitalize it.
no pressure, man.
Shadowlandthemovie.com.
I was kind of hoping actually you'd put our podcast in Shadowland so we can revitalize us.
Hey, that can be arranged, man. That can be arranged, I tell you.
That's honestly one of the things that I really love about this, though. And I do think, you mentioned earlier, indie films have a lot of, where do you go for indie films now? Film festivals and things like that. We have one here at Cleveland, a film festival, but There's not really nowadays with the streaming market a film festival. I would love that. There was like a month where it was Indie Movie Month. Everything that you would stream if you went to Netflix, or I'll just use Netflix as an example, but I don't care what service it is, you knew if you went this month to it, it's the Indie Film Spotlight. You would be able to go by genre and just look through just a wide variety of indie films that released in that year and experience them in that streaming medium. It's sad that there isn't something like that out yet where it's open to creators, because it's a one-time viewing. You log into your account and you have access to this film once. If you love it, buy it, support it. You have Kickstarter. We mentioned that earlier, where this would be kind of fan supported, and get the word out about it, kind of like preview audiences are, I would think. Sure. I would love to see something like that. I would participate in it because I think it's cool.
I think maybe sooner or later, probably it will happen. Big studios, I understand the business side of it. It's more reasonable for a big studio to put its resources behind big projects. It makes sense for a studio to put all its eggs in one basket and focus all its departments on one all-out massive mega film than it does to make 20 films. And, they have to spread their risk out a little bit over multiple films, but, I get it. When you're at the studio level, you got a lot of departments, you got a lot of people, put them onto one big film. That's a more efficient use of your resources. That makes sense to me. I can't argue with that. But then when everything becomes so profit motivated, and don't get me wrong, I'm a capitalist. I would love to be wealthy. I enjoy money. Money's a good thing. But I think there's a big difference between, everything right now is about the grand slam. If it doesn't make $1 billion worldwide, then it's not a success. Everybody wants that hit. I mean, much as I may malign Batman versus Superman, the film came close to making $900 million worldwide, and it still got bagged on because it didn't break $1 billion. That's the state of affairs we're in today. When a film is so expensive that making $900 million is considered underperforming, that tells you where the marketplace is at. And Netflix, I think Netflix takes some chances sometimes, but they don't take chances on films like ours. But I think what it's going to take is it's going to take somebody with a vision, and we've had that vision. We've talked for a long time about building a network, building the site, building the storage facility to house and host independent films, and then we have to become the gatekeepers. Then we're in a position where even as indie filmmakers who understand how this works, we're going to be looking at films and going, okay, this film isn't any good. Do we want it or not? And we've talked before about starting a website and then having a tier. Like, here's the tier 1 films, and these are all the films that are really good. And here's the tier 2 films that are okay. Here's the tier 3 films, and here's the tier 4 films that are just horrible. And then we put a different price on each one of them, and then we let people rate them differently. So we're in a position where we're going to suddenly become the gatekeepers.
And who are we to be able to say what's a good film or not then, too?
But I think people are trying, and I think if we keep our fingers crossed, like YouTube is doing this YouTube Red, where people can put their films on YouTube and get a rental fee for them. It's getting easier now to get your film posted on Amazon, so that people can pay a fee to stream your movie and watch it. Marketing's still a big thing. I mean,
Shadowland's available for streaming on Amazon, by the way.
So Shadowland's out there. It's available. We don't have the marketing power to push this thing down your throat. And, in the 1970s, we probably could have made 35 millimeter prints of Shadowland, taken it regionally around the country, bought commercial time on local television stations, and gone to a portion of the country, regional release. We could have taken a year and traveled the United States and released in a couple of dozen theaters at a time in different parts of the country, spent minor dollars buying up commercial time on local televisions, and made a killing on this. Nowadays, we can't, even if we have money to spend on advertising, we can't even begin to compete with the noise that's out there. The best we can hope to do, like with the Dark Knight film, we can target fan groups, we can target fan filmmakers, we can target Batman fans, we can target Frank Miller fans, so we have the ability to target. we don't have the power to go beyond that. With Shadowland, we spent a little bit of money putting ads in magazines. We bought an ad in Fangoria. We put an ad into the trade magazines. We got it out there. We bought some ad space, I think, on Facebook. And we did okay, but my God, it takes a big explosion to get noticed. You either have to become a darling that everybody raves about and everybody talks to death, or you got to do something magnificent. You got to do something that's just so spectacular, it can't fail but get noticed. So it's a tough business,
Well, and that brings up a whole other point too, that filmmakers are creative people, and one of the things that we run into with other filmmakers is they don't want to do the business side of it. And that's something that we've started embracing, is that this is something we want to do for the rest of our lives. This is something we want to do to make a living. And it can't just be Wyatt's mom putting this movie on his shelf and going, "Oh, good job, honey." It's got to be.
She did that.
Well, yeah,
she did that.
But it's got to be the business side of it that we really kind of explore and figure out, okay, how do we make money doing this?
It's interesting bringing it back to comic books after 2.5 hours. Bringing it back to comic books, Jason and Nick, who co-wrote Four Color Eulogy, they've gone through the making comic books thing. They've written stories, written story arcs, done their own artwork, published their own comic books, tried to get them into comic book shops, gone to conventions with them. They've done this. They've gone this route, and they've had to deal with the printers and all the issues, all the problems with things. So for this audience, I know there's people out there who are going to be listening to this who, gosh, I really want to be a comic book artist, but it's so difficult. I want to be a comic book artist, but there's so little money in it. I want to do my own independent comic, but God, then I've got to take it around to each store in the area and drop off 6 copies at a time, and I can't make a living at it. So
I got to sit in Artist Alley in every convention that I can and see if I can sell off copies.
Yeah, it's the same thing there. There's the world's greatest comic book has probably been written and printed by some independent somewhere, and we won't get to see it. It's Francis Coppola once said that the greatest film someday might end up getting made by this chubby little 13-year-old girl living in the middle of Nebraska, but nobody will see it because she doesn't have the distribution outlet. The tools are out there. Anyone can make a film now, but yeah, it's just about getting seen. But like Gayle said, we're committed to this. We're embracing it. We're not just content to sit down and go, "Oh, nobody sees our films. Nobody will pay for our movies." No, we're willing to get out there, and we're willing to slug away, and we're willing to go nose to nose and get our films out there. And, films are children, and you love them, and you raise them, and you nurture them, and then you put them out into the world, and you hope they succeed, and you do everything in your power to help your children and make sure they'll survive and graduate and get through college. And we're diehards. We'll keep going for it.
You mentioned earlier that it's streaming on Amazon.com. I also want to point out Wyatt's website. It's WyattWeed.com. And there's actually a link to the store there, which will take you right away to pirate-media.net. All of that's going to be in the show notes with direct links to the Amazon.com, to piratemedia.net, and Wyatt's website. Is there anything I'm missing that you want to promote as far as where people should be looking for information on what's coming up, where they can find things or get in touch with new projects that you're doing?
Well, as far as The Dark Knight Returns goes, we've got a Facebook page, Dark Knight Returns Epic Fan Film. Both Wyatt and I have Facebook pages. Pirate Media Group has a Facebook page, so we'll be posting stuff there. Both Four Color Eulogy and Shadowland have Facebook pages as well. So a lot of the new news goes on those pages. We try and update the websites, but I'll admit Shadowland's website's been a little neglected. But yeah, Facebook is probably the place to go for the most current stuff.
Yeah, I think between Facebook, my personal WyattWeed.com page, and then the
piratemedia.net.
The piratemedia.net, I think those are the best places to go. We're very active on Facebook, and we post about our projects very regularly. I'm going to post.
By that he means we shamelessly brag about our projects.
Yeah, that's true. We are professional media whores. We really are, and proud of it, honestly. But I will be blogging about every project I do, and that I usually share those blogs between my Facebook page and my personal website. So
we're hoping to go to more conventions this year, promoting both 4-Color and Batman and everything else that we've done. So hopefully we'll see your listeners in person.
Yeah, we'll go to conventions. I'll go to conventions as Batman or the Predator or whatever. I just want people to get me there and have it not cost me anything. I love it when people invite me to a convention and then try to sell me a hotel room and a table. I'm like, well, then why am I coming to your convention as a guest then? So, but no, I don't want to get paid to go to conventions, but I'll come and show films. I'll come and do seminars. I'll come and talk about fan films and production and getting started. I love doing this. I love talking about it. I love sharing the information with people.
That's great. And like I said, in the show notes, we'll also have links to the Facebook pages, actually. I'm glad you mentioned those because I'll make sure those are in the show notes as well. So for anybody listening, those always go in the notes. They're always on our website. You just have to go and click. So it makes it nice as a way to get in there. I actually love, one of the things I love about Facebook is how easy it is to just link to different pages, keep that interactivity going. I think that is, we were talking earlier about how do we start building this kind of fan community outreach for independent films. I think social media is on the cusp of being that resource, because I do find that I follow actors, writers, artists, and filmmakers and things like that on there, and I'm finding now we're seeing more and more people that are like yourselves, very interactive, and I think it builds fan loyalty, fan community, and anticipation. When you're talking about blogging about those films coming up, I'm going to be following those now because I've become a fan through our discussions here, but also watching your films through this. So now I'm somebody who wants to be following that for me personally to know, when are these projects coming out? What new projects are on the table? How can I see them? Because I want to see more. I'm into how you create your work. So, I mean, that's part of this. And I think this is the social media generation, is that cusp of how do we get the word out and maybe reach a new audience in the way that you used to do it when you went from city to city and region to region. Yeah. I think that's the crowd.
I think the caution that I offer everybody, I agree with you absolutely 100%. I think the only precaution I offer to filmmakers out there is there's social media and then there's social media. I mean, in the last couple of months, I went from having like 200 subscribers on YouTube to I think I'm approaching 1,300 or 1,400 subscribers now. So I've gained a huge amount of subscribers just in the last few months because of The Dark Knight Returns. My friend Ted Smith has like 100,000 plus subscribers. Now, 1,500 subscribers isn't really enough for me to make a living. My friend Ted makes a living streaming YouTube's how-to tubes on his YouTube site, and he can do it lucratively because he has 100,000 plus subscribers. I think sometimes on Facebook, like locally, we see a lot of filmmakers who, like, they're trying to get crew for their movie, or they're trying to promote a screening, or they're trying to raise money, and at a certain point in time, like if you've got 500 Facebook friends or you've got 300 likes on your page, at a certain point you're just running in circles. So you have to realize... You're not reaching a new audience. Exactly, you're not reaching a new audience. But there are Facebook people out there with thousands and thousands of friends, and yeah, they have access. So you have to... I think social media is very important, but I think you have to understand what your limitations are or know what you're doing. Because we've found when we try to do the fundraising and stuff that we have to break out. Like after a while, we've hit as many people as we can hit, and then we have to like find a new avenue or break open a new front. So, you know, there are these superstar actors who just have literally millions of followers. So I think it's just important to understand that, you know, if you have 100 people following you on Twitter, you've got a social network. If you have 7 million Twitter followers, you can make or break box office. So you just have to be realistic about how many people you're reaching. And if you're realistic about that, then you're better at it, and you can figure out how to reach more. So,
one of the things that I really do like about social media is that, like Wyatt and I were talking about, we've gone to a lot of conventions with our films. And at these conventions, we'll go to Comic-Con in Chicago, and we'll meet name actors. They may not have done a movie in a while, or they might have done any big movies in a while, but they're names. And we've then connected with them on Facebook. So instead of reaching out to somebody a couple of years down the road going, hey, we met once 5 years ago and I'd like you to be in my movie, now you reach out to them because you've been following them on Facebook or you've been interacting with them on Facebook, and you go, hey, how's it going? And they say, great, how's your cat doing? And that there's kind of a sense of knowing you as opposed to just being that one stranger they met one time years ago. There's that staying in touch, and I love that aspect of it. It kind of makes people more real, I guess.
There's actors who I'm not going to name by names, but there are actors who Gayle has met over the years at conventions, and she has stayed in touch with them. And there's always that creeping little thing in the back of our minds of, someday we're going to be going back around to these people and talking to them about working on a film project. And because she's now got that ongoing relationship, that's possible now. It can be a very good thing. It can be a very good thing. I think it can be, we've all seen with the recent election how horrible social media can be. But for what it is for marketing and for staying in touch and promoting, it's amazing. It really is amazing.
One of the things we always encourage our listeners to do here, we talked earlier about the negativity on social media, and I think you were just alluding to that now with politics and all that too. There's that flip side of it, though, where we have the ability to be agents of change. And I think your fandom audience, and I would say film applies to this just as much as the comic fandom, and there's such a blending of them. They're the ones that you're seeing a lot of people step up now and do fan sites and retweet out when things are put out there. You mentioned your kind of core audience that go to your pages, but I would encourage people listening to this, if you see something you like on any of the pages that are here, any indie film sites that you like, tweet them out. Get the word out from them. A lot of times you are the ones that can make the difference between something being a success or not noticed. I catch so many new things from something that somebody has tweeted out, posted on Facebook, that I never even knew about or podcasted. Every one of these mediums were little pieces, little cogs out there that help spread the word. But it only works. It's not the people that listen to this independently of themselves. It's what they do. If you listen to this and you check out either the fan film or Shadowland, get the word out to people that these things are out there. We all know friends that like these genres. Share them with them. Get the word out. Let them know that these things are available so that way they get to it. That's the positive impact, I think, of social media nowadays when people take advantage of that versus all the complaining all the time. And I think we're seeing more of that. I have a lot of fun going on Facebook because when people post fun things, I gather something from them, and I watch new television shows. I can't tell you how many things streaming now that I find out about from social media before I find out about it on the actual product I'm streaming it from. So I think that's really critical because putting it out there on social media is free. Don't just leave it sitting on its page. Share it. Because your followers, meaning us as the people that go to your sites, your followers are people that maybe don't touch those pages and have never seen that before. It takes 2 seconds to blast it out. Now all of a sudden they're aware. If even 10 of them go there, that's now what...
that we've started doing too on the Dark Knight Returns fan page on Facebook is that we're doing Fan Film Fridays, and Wyatt has collected a whole list of other people's fan films that he really likes, and so we're trying to share those and just help spread the word about other really great films that are out there. So we know people that those fan films don't know, and we're trying to help spread the word for them. So, it comes around.
And you talk about people spreading it. Dark Knight Returns, I think we just probably passed 163,000 views. It hasn't been out quite 2 months, We've gotten 163,000 views. I guarantee you, I don't have 163,000 friends.
Yeah.
And even in my circles and Gayle's circles combined, we don't reach 163,000 people. So somebody is helping us. People are retweeting. People are reposting. YouTube viewers are informing other YouTube viewers. They're reposting it on their likes on their YouTube channels. We're talking to guys like you. We're doing podcasts. You guys are getting the word out. So yeah, we're a living, breathing example. We would not have 162,000 views at this point without the very thing that you're talking about, with people going, "Oh, dude, this is cool. Check this out." Or, "Hey, all of you, I saw this. This is really neat. Check this out." So yeah, you're absolutely 100% right.
And I like that. I like feeling like I'm a part of it. It makes me a part. It does. It makes me feel like I'm part of the team. You know, it's something that I liked, and feeling like that I can get that out there and have somebody touch it. I think is cool. So I mean, I think it's part of our responsibility as fans, and we're big promoters of that on our podcast, and our listening audience. They're around because they're like-minded, and they all do it. I mean, which is great. And so I really appreciate that our audience does it, because I think it's part of the community aspect of what's going on right now in fandom that I think is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
Own that. Own the movie. Own it up. You know, take the ownership of this.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to thank both of you for coming on. This has been amazing. I've really enjoyed the conversations, getting to know both of you, getting to know, there's so many things I could still ask you at this point. But what I really want to say, is there anything that, you know, I threw out web addresses and anything like that. Is there anything that we didn't mention that you wished we would had that you want to get out there to the audiences? We've covered a lot.
No, I think you guys have done a great job. When we started, you talked about, you know, it's a natural conversation and it goes as long as it goes. It's nice for us to do stuff like this because we have done a lot of press in the past. We have made a lot of appearances. We have been on the radio. We have been on talk shows, and it's tough to talk in sound bites, and it's very difficult and it's frustrating because there is so much more to the story. So the fact that we can sit down and have a conversation like this with you two guys is amazing, because, you know, we get to touch on the stuff that is very, very rarely, nobody's got time for it. And it's a nice change of pace to get to do this, because, you know, and we've even learned, somebody says we want to bring you on to promote your movie. We want to talk to you about this thing you're filming. And we go on and we say, well, what's the length of our segment? Well, we've got 3 minutes. And that tells us right there, we got to talk in sound bites. We have to talk in big ideas, and we have to talk in quick snippets. And it's a real joy to come on something like this and be able to just go through all the details and get all the stories. And oh yeah, there's 100 things we could talk about, and there's tangents I could go off on, and, you know. But no, this feels great because it really does feel like we got the big chunk out there. I don't feel like there's anything we didn't really get to cover.
Well,
agreed. Yeah, and it was nice getting to know you guys too.
You as well. And so thank you so much for your time today and for joining us for this episode, because we really had a great time. And please know we've got an open invite. You're welcome back anytime. We'd love to have you again. So,
that's awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's great.
Hope this craft can withstand this powerful force.
I would like to remind you about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434. Or Dr. Norge on Skype. We love having you part of the show, so feel free to call in with any of your comments. Actually, if you've seen any of these movies that we've discussed in the last 2 episodes, we'd love to hear your comments. So feel free to call into the show. We'll be happy to air them on a future episode. I do air all voicemails. Please make sure to check out the show links. I have direct links to Wyatt Weed, Gayle Gallagher, Pirate Media, Pirate Pictures, all of their websites, and Facebook groups that they're a part of. So it's a great chance, if you want to connect with them, get to know more about their projects, to comment on them if you've seen them. Be sure to check out those links, click on them, and support people who've given us some great time on this. I really enjoyed this opportunity. It's something that's a little bit of a departure with us. We've been lucky in the time that we've podcasted. We've had unique opportunities that have presented themselves. So I hope for those of you that are longtime listeners, this is a nice little departure, something just a little different to add to kind of our bucket list of things that we've talked about. So I want to thank them again for joining us today. Once again, we're sponsored by DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Remember, it's the end of the month. It's time for you to check out what DCB Service is offering on deals. Be sure to check out DCBService.com. Over at InStockTrades.com, they are your collected edition source. Hardcovers, trades, absolute editions, archive editions, whatever kind of volumes, masterpieces from Marvel and things like that. Whatever kind of collected editions you are into, it's a great way to get these at a discount. And when we're trying to build a collection, it's great to have an opportunity to get those books at 50% off or sometimes even more. They have deals from 35 to 45 to 50% off and then some. They offer clearance sales all the time, and I don't talk about them often enough on the show, but you'll always see them up on the top banner. It's a great way to catch up on some books that maybe you're like, oh, I wanted to get these, and you get 2 or 3 of them at, sometimes up to 75% off. It's a great deal for those collected editions. A lot of times you can only find those when you go to cons, so it's nice to be able to get those shipping and online right to your house. So check out InStockTrades.com and DCBService.com. And thank them once again for supporting our podcast. Our next episode, Jim and I are going to go back and do some comic chat. We have a couple other surprises coming up this month, and it depends on when we're going to be recording them. So there's some things in the works that we haven't been able to share with you yet, but some exciting opportunities are coming our way. A discussion that we really want to have. An old friend's going to come back and visit the show to talk about a book that he's currently working on. So I'll tease it a little bit, just because we're excited to have him come back and to discuss a really cool project he's involved in right now. But Jim and I will be going back to some comic chat and just chatting about some of our favorite books. So we will see you next week.
Bye.
On November 13th, Sean Whalen was asked to stop constantly talking about comic books. That request came from his wife. Deep down, he knew she was right, but he also knew that someday he would find someone that would talk to him. With nowhere else to go, he appeared at the home of his childhood friend Jim Seguin. Sometime earlier, Seguin's boss had requested that he shut up about his comic books and never speak of them again. Can 2 grown men put out a DC Comics podcast without driving each other crazy? It's Raging Bullets, the DC Comics fan podcast. With Sean Whalen as Dr. Norge, and Jim Seguin as the Sensei of the Whatnot and the Duke of You Know. It's a spoiler podcast, so they will go in depth into the plot line, story twists, and whatnot of the comics they are reviewing. So if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you may better enjoy the show.